Thanks, David. Up next, we've got Pablo Dodero Carrillo, is a musician from Tijuana, Mexico, currently based in San Diego, California. He's pursuing a PhD in Integrative Studies at UCSD, sorry. He's an active member of the Tijuana and San Diego DIY music communities, and he's a contributor to Reverb.com and Remezcla. Please welcome Pablo Dodero Carrillo. You just press the button, right, Ozzy? This one? The green guy? Yeah, there you go. All right.
Hola. I just wanted to preface this presentation by saying that this is part of ongoing research that I'm doing for my dissertation. A lot of this is happening kind of on the fly. There's not a lot of distance between what's happening with my field work and now, so it's been a little bit of a challenge. But so today I'll be talking about the pervasive use of English in electronic music instrument design and its effect on non-native speakers. So I got the idea for this by sitting in my studio looking at a guitar pedal that I have owned for several years. It doesn't really get a lot of use these days because I shifted my practice from guitar to synthesizers. So I work with modular synthesizers now. But I keep it as part of my collection because it was one of the first effect pedals designed, manufactured, and marketed in Tijuana, Mexico by Paradox Effects in 2016. Is it that one? Oh, that one. The Fuzzy Cat, as it is called, is a, quote, roaring oscillatory feline, a highly sensitive fuzz that creates many textures with few controls. As we can see in image 1, it is designed to look like the face of an electrified cartoon cat, zoomorphic, I think somebody had mentioned that before. 2 knobs for eyes. One of the knobs is labeled volumen, and the other one is fuzz. So my discussion looked at the pervasiveness of English in the design of electronic music instruments and its effect on non-native speakers. For clarification, I will be using the term EMI as a catch-all that refers to synthesizers and effect pedals on equal terms as they relate to language and agency. When looking at an EMI such as the Fuzzy Cat, I ask, what is English doing on this label? The question is not, what the hell is English doing on a Mexican pedal? The global spread of English explains that. My question is, what is English doing to this interface alongside Spanish? I approach this question from the standpoint that English is the lingua franca of EMI design, and yet the word volumen is used instead of volume. And so, to me, the design practices of non-native speaking EMI designers offers a really unique perspective on how identity, creativity, and imaginaries in music making are shaped by language. So, my interest in language comes from my own experience as a bilingual who has spent a lot of time learning and perfecting English from elementary school into my graduate studies. As a musician, a large portion of the language I use to discuss sound is in English. Although I'm still able to discuss sound and EMIs in Spanish, some terms are only available in English. As an example, if I'm talking to somebody about a guitar pedal, I would be like, ¿Dónde está tu delay? So I would have to use the word delay basically for each of the conversation. So to discuss this mixing of languages, I employ the term translanguaging, taking from Ofelia Garcia and Li Wei's work in critical linguistics. When discussing EMIs, the translanguaging acts in a network made up of humans and technological objects. For this reason, I'm also interested in Peter Paul Verbeek's, what he refers to as material hermeneutics. Verbeek derives this term from the ideas of Don Ide. He calls the larger framework hermeneutic relations. Hermeneutic relations describe how humans and technological artifacts engage with each other. Material hermeneutics affords technological artifacts agency in these sort of subject-object relationships And I kind of employ Bruno Latour's actor network theory to sort of place them in a network of agency. So as a peer and collaborator of these designers in the fieldwork that I've done, I bring my own positionist method to translate these relations by performing close reads on two specific instruments from Mexican EMI designers. And a close read of their labels and their marketing materials. By doing so, I bring into relief notions of identity, nationality, and creativity as they relate to this sort of hegemonic, or not sort of, very much hegemonic imposition of English. Let's see, next slide. So, as far as my critical linguistics framework, so the pervasiveness of English in the design of EMIs is a result of how globalization has contributed to the myth that English is the language of modernity. In the myth of English as an international language, Alistair Pennycook, who I kind of call like the Frank Zappa of critical linguistics, he says, blows your mind, describes the way in which English as an international language is, quote, the product of ritualized social performatives that become sedimented into temporary subsistence, end quote. Although this spread is central to my argument, I'm interested in what Pennycook describes as language effects as it pertains to its materiality. I'm interested in, Pennycook states, quote, my interest here is in a post-structuralist rewriting of discursive performativity as it operates in the materialization of language. So I guess saying how language turns into material and how we engage with material objects because of this materialization. In Decolonizing the Mind, Ngugi wa Thiong'o states, quote, language, any language has a dual character. It is a means of communication and a carrier of culture, end quote. So following these ideas, I posit that the hegemonic imposition of the English language, and by consequence its material effects, has a colonizing effect on non-native speakers, specifically discussing electronic music instrument designers. So translanguaging is defined as the language practices of bilinguals, not as two autonomous language systems, as has been traditionally the case, but as one linguistic repertoire with features that have been societally constructed as belonging to two separate languages. If English spreads through ritualized social performatives and language effects extend to the material, I argue that translanguaging also happens in these subject-object relations. So by conducting close reads on the labels, manuals, and the actual topology of the paradox effects fuzzy cat, and now introducing the Boku Mask filter module, I illustrate how translanguaging has material effects. I'll get through this boring stuff quickly. So my discussion focuses on how the pervasiveness of English has played an important role in the design of instruments. And so it affects the agency of designers, users, and actually the objects themselves. So as Verbeek explains in a sort of, in his own understanding of Latour and what he calls translation, Verbeek states, Latour interests himself precisely in the various ways in which entities are continually translated when brought into relation with other entities. In my translation, however, I will take special care to bring the two languages, quote, in close connection with one another, with the aim of producing a fertile hybrid of phenomenological and actor network theory notions, which can be used to analyze how artifacts co-shape human actions. So later in my discussion, I will talk about the fuzzy cat and how it was conceived in relation to the famous pedal, the fuzz phase. More traditional circuitries, like the fuzz phase, become the norm from which other circuitries derive from. So Latourian translation permits us to interface interactions between humans and objects. It is helpful to consider EMIs as sort of actants with agency of their own. So as Verbeek states, quote, the reason that Latour insists on treating humans and non-humans symmetrically in his descriptions is because of the roles they play in the networks, and because the roles they play are equivalent. For a non-native speaker, however, there is a cultural barrier that is fortified by the English language that kind of weakens these equivalencies. So for a musician working with AMIS, the mediation begins with the interface. So your first engagement with an instrument is its label. For designers and tinkerers, mediation extends into the technology behind these objects. At this ontological juncture, language is the first stage of the mediation process, where fluency in English translates into agency. Agency and fluency are then imbricated, and when English is continually afforded the status of lingua franca, it becomes apparent that agency is only afforded to those who understand it. However, this does not mean that AMIs cannot be used without the prior knowledge of English. In fact, I approach instruments in the same way I did when I picked up my first electric guitar 30 years ago, which is that I play it first and then I ask what it's for later. In a scenario like this, the user interacts with the object's agency and language becomes less important in the actor in the network. These continuous shifts of agency in language, materiality, and humans that occur in, I guess what I'm trying to say here is that the shifts of agency in language, agency in humans that occur in objects, electronic music instruments, are really are basically my core of what I'm studying. So, as previously stated, the term material hermeneutics and hermeneutic relations become a helpful framework to parse out components of technological mediation. So for IDE, some artifacts mediate human experience of the world by requiring them to be interpreted. For example, the difference between a pair of glasses, which mediate by seeing through them, versus a synthesizer, which requires programming and adjustment in order to perform music with it. Because neither Verbig nor IDE account for language barriers in the mediation process, I propose reading of AMIs through critical linguistics lens, which will contribute to a more inclusive methodology. Whew. I'm in my second year of my PhD, so theory seems really important somehow. So during my first year of my grad program, I approached Efrain Castro, co-founder of Paradox Effects, to discuss my research ideas. We already had a long-standing relationship as peers in the DIY music circuit and as friends. So the idea of bringing kind of into relief this pervasive use of English has been in our musical, and how it's been important in our musical activities really resonated with him. So Paradox has been able to market beyond its locality thanks to social media, online music retail stores, and English has played a key role in making their effects pedals visible. Paradox has put effort into marketing their products in English, a process that has proven both labor-intensive and very difficult. An interesting observation is that many of the it has been very difficult, but an observation here is that a lot of these terms are already in English, like fuzz, delay, cutoff, feedback, etc. In fact, Paradox has become very deliberate in putting Spanish at the center of its design process. It has found it very difficult to use terms in Spanish because of this sort of ubiquitous pervasiveness. To translate a word in a literal sense may not translate into terms that are marketable. When Paradox used the word volumen instead of volume, I really interpret that as an act of translanguaging with decolonial implications. So to contest English as the de facto sonic language opens up new possibilities of identification when it materializes. The attention that Paradox has garnered is actually in the global community has been due to their unique designs, both aesthetic, as we saw with the fuzzy cat, and in their functionality. So uniqueness and originality are highly valued in this boutique pedal market, as some of you may know. While mass-produced electronic music instruments are seen as the materialization of tried and true topologies, boutique EMIs tend to be more experimental and unusual. Paradox markets the Fuzzy Cat as, quote, a silicon-based, amorphous take on the fuzz face topology, end quote. So the fuzz face is a highly regarded effect pedal designed in 1966 by Arbiter Electronics in the UK and made famous by artists like Jimi Hendrix. Its circuitry has been reimagined by many effect pedal designers from across the globe due to the ease with which it can be built and modified. But by engaging with the fuzz face circuit in their marketing materials, Paradox is also participating in this transnational act of making. The term amorphous may extend not only to the arrangement of components in the circuit, but also the combination of languages. By looking at Paradox's own take on the fuzz face circuit, we engage in, quote, cross-cultural studies of the use of electronic music technology and instruments. So in demystifying and classifying electronic music instruments, Michael B. Bacon et al. Discuss EMIs in ethnomusicological research. Through cross-cultural studies of the use of electronic music technology and styles, we may be able to distinguish various commonalities in music, styles, aesthetics, and personal preferences of different cultures as the same electronic music instruments are commonly adopted. Similarities may become apparent. From a broader point of view, it may also help improve our understanding of the stable aspects of music culture as well as variables cross-culturally. While this article approaches organology from an ethnomusicological perspective, and it describes a desire to, I'm saying the article that I'm quoting right now, it desires to expand on the Horn-Brustol sax system to include EMIs, which basically was just adding an E after every other instrument. It is content with accounting for their adoption, but not their design. I expand on this by including that the act of modification, reimagining, and customization are helpful frameworks to the field of ethnomusicology and organology. In the previously mentioned example, the fuzz face topology acts as a co-conspirator of English. Whether it is a musician from Guadalajara wishing to incorporate a new effect pedal into their sonic repertoire, or a maker wishing to create a new circuitry, the options available derive from English. If we were to embark in a cross-cultural study surrounding the adoption of instruments, then cultural barriers must be accounted for. In one of our conversations, Castro commented, yes, we make overdrives, fuzzes, and whatnot, but we are working with technological tools to be creative. This is an important distinction that shows how creativity has become an important marker for paradox effects in the global marketplace. Castro studied electronic engineering at Universidad Autónoma de Baja California, where I actually also studied. His growing interest in effect pedals began to clash with the school's focus on the job market. It was late in his studies that he decided to leave school and focus on paradox. Inspired by the DIY ethos of the effect pedal community and out-of-the-box designs of companies like Death by Audio and Zvex, Castro opted to turn his creative technological practice into his livelihood. I consider this entrepreneurial venture inspired by artists in a very different socioeconomic milieu as a translation of agency. By way of the act of making, So Nick Melavoy, in a premiere guitar review of one of Paradox's Effects' newer pedals, Carmesí, states, Paradox Effects are a Tijuana-based company whose pedals usually offer a tweaked take on traditional effects. It is worth mentioning that Carmesí's label is entirely in Spanish, and I will discuss that a little bit at the end. So I argue that this review shows how Paradox's creativity is at the center of its brand from the perspective of a non-native speaker of Spanish, which is Nick Melavoy. Oops. So this brings me to my second case study, the Boku Mask. So Boku is a synthesizer company from Guadalajara, Mexico, founded by Emmanuel Galvan. I was made aware of their existence through the Mexican musical, it was an exhibition of Mexican musical technology organized by Paradox Effects. So it's kind of a very small community in 2021. Galvan's background is also in electronic engineering, and like Castro, it was easy for him to begin modifying EMI circuits. Bokuma's website currently offers a build-your-own kit for a pocket-sized synthesizer and its flagship product, the Esquivel state variable filter. Esquivel is made in Eurorack format for the modular synthesizer systems. And although the popularity of these modular systems has grown in the last 5 years, it is not very accessible format for the budget musician. So in this way, I find similarities between a boutique pedal and the Eurorack builder, specifically because the market shares this interest in sort of paying a premium for unique, high-end, and high-quality EMIs. So the Esquivel is a very well-constructed and stylized state variable filter module. The module takes its name from Mexican space-age pop composer and innovator Juan Garcia Esquivel. His world-renowned music legacy is in the genres of exotica, lounge, and space-age pop. And it has afforded him a sort of a national hero in Mexico. Compared to the Fuzzy Cat, though, the Bokuma does not state that the Esquivel derives from one particular filter circuit in specific. And so during a conversation with Emmanuel Galvan, he mentioned that he was inspired to build the functional filter, but centering specifically on Esquivel as a person. Specifically because there is a sort of myth that Esquivel was also an engineer, and this has been an also difficult methodology because I have not been able to find any of his thesis or anything, and so it brings up other issues of archiving musical technology in Mexico. Let's see. So the Esquivel filter pays homage to the composer as much as it does to Mexican innovation. By producing this musical technology, Bokuma and Paradox are sort of intervening and ideating an epistemological of innovation. So I will be discussing that in a larger dissertation work regarding the stifled sort of Mexican innovation due to socio-political context. When I spoke to Galvan about Bokuma's design practices, I raised a question about the language and the labeling of the Esquivel. Galvan replied, "I never considered language as a part of the design process, but coincidentally, I have been shifting to symbols or abbreviations of words to avoid using strictly English in my designs." So here we see that in the filter, we have a cutoff and it's written out. The filter frequency is used, Q is commonly used in a lot of filters. But we still have N1, N2, N3. That's a photo of Esquivel. I don't know how many people are aware or familiar with him, but he was a Mexican composer that worked with synthesizers, and a lot of the newer generations in Mexico don't really know who he is, but as we all kind of go back and revisit our own heritage, we are unearthing a lot of these legacies. And you can see his face printed on the PCB on the back of the filter module. So here is the second version of the Boku Esquivel, and now you see that the filter cutoff has been replaced with the symbol. So while Galvan did not consider shifting from English to a symbolic language as a deliberate decolonial act, I posit that as an act of translanguaging, it responds to the pervasiveness of English and reveals other threads in the linguistic repertoire that go beyond bilinguality. So not just Spanish, not just English, but also a symbolic language. Okay, so for my conclusions, as I mentioned in the beginning, this has been a sort of a live wire project in which I am still involved in these communities, and I'm talking to them, and even them knowing that I'm presenting here has been a great joy for them, and also under visibility of their own identity as builders in this global community. So I would like to just talk a little bit about what's been going on. For the last few years, the maker community in Mexico has begun to build stronger platforms for collaboration, inspired by the DIY ethos of the global English-speaking communities centered around EMIs, Mexican designers, educators, and musicians, and have shifted the conversation to Spanish. Social media accounts like Eurorack en Español have emerged, offering tutorials in Spanish, and working with synthesizer companies in the US to translate manuals. So Eurorack en Español has been working with noise engineering to translate their entire website into Spanish. And Paradox Effects has actually changed their slogan to un lenguaje sónico, which is a sonic language. Paradox has also organized an exhibición de tecnología musical mexicana, Mexican musical technology exhibition, to encourage collaboration and dialogue among national makers. So I argue that performing close reads on EMIs, treating them as complex and robust networks of mediation and agency, we're able to parse out the ways in which language carries cultural hegemony that becomes consolidated into the material. Translanguaging offers a unique perspective into the subjectivities of bilinguals and how the idea of the repertoire contests English pervasiveness in technological innovation and imaginaries. So by engaging with material and linguistic flows of power and agency, EMIs become more than just instruments. So finally, I'd like to just reread the Nick Melavoy quote from Premier Guitar, but I'm going to read the complete quote. It says, "Paradox Effects are a Tijuana-based company whose pedals usually offer a tweaked take on traditional effects. Before I could dig into this pedal, I headed over to the Paradox site to translate control names, which are in Spanish, before I could wrap my head around the controls." This quote illustrates the effects of decentering English from the design of EMIs and shifts the onus of translation to the native speaker of these weakening lingua franca. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Pablo. Heady stuff, but really, but really critical stuff. And I think, underscoring the determinism of this pervasive language. And I think, and it's funny because you look at the schematics and you see schematics and there's a whole other language, right? Like where you see the schematic of a technology, but then how we interpret those with English language can be a bit of a mono kind of orthodoxy.
Yeah, it's an entry point for sure.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. Well, I'm sure there's some questions from the audience. Do we have any questions for Pablo before we break for coffee break? We've got one down here and one right beside each other, so we'll go 1 and 2.
So I found your discussion of the kind of shift from English to symbolic indications on EMIs interesting, but that kind of raised the question in my mind. So if you're shifting from English or any other language to a symbolic representation, you would then need to, like for people like me who don't know all the indications on these devices, I would need some kind of manual to explain what the symbol means. And then, if you were still marketing for both English and Spanish, do these devices come with a manual that's in multiple languages to explain the symbology?
Yeah, I think sort of embedded in that question is sort of an attempt to change things to one or other language, and that's actually what I'm unseating, that one language should not be the language with which we perceive sonic phenomenology, because I think it limits our ability. It's kind of like I've run out of pedals. Like, well, how can I make new ideas with other languages? So I actually encourage this translanguaging idea, which is like you can do it in 15 languages if you want on the interface. maybe you can use a Mayo hieroglyph for a reverb. You can use a symbol for this. It ultimately comes down that you can use that pedal even if you don't speak any language, even if it's not even labeled. But the entry points into these designs are from English language, and that has a lot of socio-political class issues that I am just arguing so that basically more people can enter this field. I hope that answers the question.
Ray, I think had a question. Did you have a question as well? Yeah, I think actually now just over here. Yeah. We'll probably just take this question, then we'll have to break. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, I'm intrigued by your translations when you said a language sonic or un lengua sonico. You know, that sounds to my ears, even if I don't understand what it means, you have the color of the language, and I think that is very important for the design of musical instruments already in the, let's say, 17th century. Like the instruments in European woodwind instruments would sound very different from each other in different regions, because the language, the sound of the language, like is more like French and German, you know, it's very different. And what musical instruments try to do is to imitate language. So is that a point for you?
For them, it's an issue of nationality, and instead of discussing things through circuitry, it's making a new nationality through the sounds that their instruments make. So it is kind of what you say, but it's more about we don't have a sonic legacy because it's been stifled, so let's start with our marketing through sound, not through topologies. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. Pablo Carrillo. All right, it's time for the coffee break. We've got, I think, a little under 25 minutes, and then session 6 on banjos and harps. Thank you very much.